Welcome to the Faster, Easier, Better show with your hosts LeeSilber and Ellen Goodwin.
Welcome to another episode of the Faster, Easier, Better show. I'm your co-host Ellen Goodwin, along with my co-host
LeeSilber.
Hey Lee, guess what we've got today?
Well, I know the answer, and we have a special guest.
We do. Our special guest is Jon Menaster. By day, he's a mild-mannered consultant at the nonpartisan U.S. Government Accountability Office, where he leads projects focused on emerging science and technology issues. His work is directly responsible for over 30 recommendations, resulting in over $5 billion in cost savings for the federal government. He's currently leading a project examining the state of the cutting-edge artificial intelligence technology used for the delivery of healthcare services. By night, Jon is a podcasting superhero, and his podcast, Read, Learn, Live, has welcomed over 70 authors since 2016, from the New York real estate developer Francis Greenberger to Cuban science fiction writer and heavy metal band leader Yoss. The show's episodes have been downloaded over 30,000 times. Jon was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, and now resides in Brooklyn, New York. Welcome, Jon.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here. I hope that bio was impressive sounding enough. That was my main goal.
It was super impressive, and that's the end of the show.
Okay, that's it.
Just kidding. We've got some. So Jon has a podcast. Lee and I have both been on it.
That's
and
right.
So we've got some questions both about podcast and just life and being productive and efficient with a dual life like you're running there. You know,
Yeah.
Working for the GAO and then doing podcasts. So Lee's going to start off.
Well, I thought I knew the question I was going to ask, which I will ask. I'll ask that one first because I don't want to throw Jon a curve, but I do.
You ask whatever you want of me. I'm an open book.
I was just thinking, listening to your bio, two things stuck out. One, that you've lived on both coasts, born in Los Angeles. You live in Brooklyn now, you know what I'm saying? And so I was thinking, that's an interesting perspective on the right and left coast or east and west coast, and how I think the groups of people that live in certain geographies and certain time zones look at time differently. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I agree. I mean, first off, I'll start off by saying I am like the ultimate night owl. I am always up late, regardless of which coast I'm on. I will find a way to stay up late and a way to maximize sleeping in. That's just me. But yeah, I think on the West Coast, for a lot of jobs, a lot of my friends, you're required to wake up a little earlier, right? Because you're often working with people on the East Coast that have already been up, that are already doing things. So if you have kind of a 9-to-5 office job and you have that on the East Coast and you connect with people on the West Coast, they might have to wake up even earlier. I have friends that are colleagues now that are waking up at 6 or 7 in the morning to start working with us on the East Coast. So that's tough. Well, luckily, I was able to find a job when I was on the West Coast that was sort of just a West Coast-based company, so I never had to subject myself to any of that. But I think in general, people tend to be more relaxed. I think that is true of the West Coast. It's a big stereotype, but I think it's the case. So I think things move a little bit more slowly. That's something that I would agree with. Definitely, DC and New York, the two East Coast cities I've lived in, things are very hustle bustle. And I think that affects things a lot in terms of the way that you perceive each other and the way you perceive, yourself. So yeah, I think probably the climate helps with that to some degree, right? But also the cars, the nature of DC and New York, you don't need a car at all. There are subways everywhere. So I think there's a lot of difference between at least where I've lived. And yeah, I don't know. People always ask, which one do you like better? That's like people's number one question as soon as they find out that I'm.
Which one do you like better?
Yeah, right. It's like, well,
sorry.
I have to answer Los Angeles. It's, it's home. all my family is there. It's where I grew up, my formative years. The weather's the best. And my son, I think that's permanently my favorite. But I live in New York now. I really enjoy it. I do not like driving. I'm very happy to be able to take the subway everywhere. But, when we could go places, to be able to not have to worry. And same for Washington, D.C. That was so nice. So not having to have a car is a big balance in terms of a quality of life there that it's really important to me.
It's interesting. I moved from the West Coast, even further west, out to Hawaii, and we would have to get up, to watch a football game. They would start at 9 o'clock in the morning, and people tended to get up early, go surfing, go to work early, and go to bed earlier. And I think, as we were talking about the difference between New York and Los Angeles, I mean, you live in a city that never sleeps. And so the fact that you're a night owl makes a lot of sense. I just find that fascinating. Your explanation of what makes the two different as far as it relates to time and efficiency, I think is important. I mean, speaking of LA and the commute, I mean, you're driving your car. It's hard to do something else while you're on a subway. You could maximize that time by reading or doing other things. So that's a great answer. Very, very enlightening.
I lived in DC before I moved out here, and I remember coming out here and just going, God, people are so slow. It's just, it was just as totally different. Just go with different. So, cool. So was that your whole question?
Well, I have another one, but I'll save it for later because it just his introduction made me think, I have a great question to ask, but I feel like, I don't want to take over the show again. So I will hold my question till the end.
Okay. So, Jon, for your podcast, you interview authors and you read the book, which is awesome.
I sure do.
Yeah. And it seems like nobody reads anymore. So how do you find time to read? Did you have to give something up to do that, or do you make it a priority? And do you only read for your podcast?
Yeah, so a lot there. So I think one of the most important things to know about me is I love reading. I am obsessed with reading. I love books. This is something my dad passed down to me when I was a kid. Our whole family, everyone is constantly churning through books. And maybe my dad and I are the ones that are like the most focused and doing the most reading, but yeah, I love reading and it is so important to me. The podcast is definitely not the only reading I do. I am in a book club, I think probably, and then I have a personal book. I'm probably reading like 3 or 4 books at any given time. And so, yeah, I get that question a lot, like where do you find all this time to read? I don't have any time. And I'll tell you, the answer is mostly I don't really watch TV. And, so I feel like sometimes I reframe that question when people ask me where I find the time. And I'll ask people, where do you find all the time to watch TV? Because sometimes I'll talk to people for a few minutes and it's clear they are so passionate about X or Y show. Like as soon as people find out that I don't really watch TV, they love to try and get me to watch their favorite show. They're just like, but wait a minute, there's one show, just, fine, I know, but just one show that you really should take a look at, Jon. I'm like, if all I did was listen to everybody's show that I should take a look at, all I would do is watch TV with all that. So yes, now I don't watch TV and it leaves me out of some conversations sometimes, right? Because TV is way more popular than reading. So, to buy the virtual water cooler now, those conversations, I'm just not connected as much. I'm not able to participate. And that's a conscious choice, that I just have to acknowledge that I'm going to be a little left out and that's okay. My good friends kind of have come to terms with that. And we talk about other things when we're all together sometimes. One thing I did want to speak to though, I think it's interesting the way you phrase that when, did you have to give anything up? And when I thought about that question, giving something up to me means that I had to stop doing something I was passionate about or excited about, or it has kind of that negative connotation. Like, gosh, I had to give up, walking after I got in a cast for a little while or something.
Right.
And to me, I was never that enthused by TV generally. Like there's some stuff like again, we're all kind of nerds in my family. So like Star Trek was big and I used to watch a lot of that, and, you know, other things, Battlestar Galactica and stuff like that. But by and by, like, it's not something that I really am drawn to so much. So it wasn't anything that was like, okay, I'm deciding that I am now not watching TV anymore and I'm going to read. It was just that reading was introduced to me. So maybe there's some sort of, you know, developmental psychology there. Someone could break apart about, you know, what getting someone to read at a young age does. And maybe it is harder now because younger people have a lot more exposure to television and other forms of media when they're younger. So that becomes a part of their kind of life a lot sooner than it did for me. You know, for example, my parents didn't have cable TV. Without cable TV in like the 80s, you were pretty limited. Even being in LA, I mean, there was like the main broadcast stations, but that was it. There wasn't the internet. There wasn't anything else. You know, so there were books. Books played a bigger, I mean, it's weird to think of just in such a short time period how much of our culture shifted. But anyway, I constantly read, and it's important to me. I set aside time every day to be sure I'm reading something. And, you know, when I interview people for the podcast, I think that is really a big value add, to read a book cover to cover, to really understand it and make sure that the author especially can be happy. And I've got a lot of people that as soon as they see the questions, they're like, wow, you read the book, you get it. And authors are so much more excited to talk to me about their book, knowing that I actually care. And it wasn't just me, you know, breezing through the table of contents and then copying and pasting some, you know, press questions that somebody sent or anything like that.
Well, you know, it would sound like you're not somebody that embraces technology and that you're trapped in a Jane Austen world. But the truth is, you are super technical, and
right.
Which I think is great. Which was kind of my question: is how often do you find that using technology saves you time, and what form of technology helps you to not only be better at doing your podcast, but also helps you to save time and be more efficient in how you manage your time?
Yeah, I have nothing but simple answers to this. I mean, I use a calendar and I use it excessively, perhaps. I mean, I really carefully track everything, including putting on there, you know, when I'm expecting things back, you know, or you know, so I sort of combine a calendar and a to-do, but I just use Google Calendar, and, you know, I had separate to-do apps here or there. And I still have, I still sometimes use, I use one called Todoist, and that's helpful to build a list of things. But in general, I put everything on Google Calendar, from work to podcasts, because again, since I'm balancing things, I need to be sure that, like, oh, if some big work project is due and I might have to work late, don't schedule a podcast interview, or even not just for that night, but anytime around that. Because I have to, you know, before the interviews, I'm reading a lot. So I have to spend a lot of time prepping questions and doing interviews. So I have to really manage my time out. And so I have to be constantly thinking about not just the podcast scheduling, but also my my day job and what that's going to look like for me, and try and kind of balance things out there. And that's led to sometimes, if I know that, you know, my day job is going to be maybe a little bit even keel for a certain period, I'll try and do a bunch of podcast interviews in a row, and then, you know, just post them into the future over some time period. So that way, if things get busy later, I've already got them kind of banks. And so that's kind of just, but so Google Calendar is just like the super basic way I do that. And I think it's really helpful for me to be able to pull that up and instantly see everything that's going on in my life. It sort of offloads that out of my brain, and I don't have to think anymore. And that's important. I also use, so I used to be a huge fan of Evernote. I've now transitioned into something called Joplin, which is sort of an open source free version that everything is encrypted and it's all on your own. And so there's no connection with Evernote. And so I always, I value tools that protect privacy. And since Evernote is free, you know, you figure they're making money somehow. And so I don't know, I'm always a little wary of that sort of thing. So Joplin's essentially a replacement, but I use that as sort of the ultimate note-taking tool. And I think that's really helpful for me, for work, for the podcast, for anything else, when I'm getting recipes, wherever I can just plug stuff in, tag it very easily, see what, just very easily. It's just straight text, nothing fancy, no audio, video, nothing else, just text. And so for every podcast episode, it'll have a separate note there. It has the bio, it has info about the guest, maybe from something else. And so I think that's really helpful to me, again, to have sort of a digital notebook that I can organize and has notes kind of going back to for the beginning of time at this point. Like, it's been so long. I imported all my notes from Evernote. So it's, 10 years worth of notes or whatever are all there. And they're just text. It takes up no space. And it's very fast to search. So that is very helpful, because I can look through, like, if someone reaches out about a book about X topic, I can quickly see, like, did I ever even consider doing an interview with someone about that topic? Or if I'm doing something for my day job, did I look into something about that at all at any point? I don't have to, again, remember anything. I'm offloading this to the computer. And then finally, I use GarageBand to edit my podcast. And
I've tried behind the curtains. All right.
Yeah. GarageBand. I'm a huge GarageBand fan. I've tried many other tools and paid and otherwise. I think GarageBand is super easy to use, super simple. It's just dragging and clicking around. There's this Logic Pro is kind of Apple's fancier version of it. Right. But GarageBand does what I need to do, and it's how I edit my podcasts, and it's just a perfect tool for my needs. I'm not doing some kind of epic podcast with a million sound effects and other things and other, different people clips coming in here or there. Like, it's just a one-on-one interview, very straightforward, kind of 60 minutes. So because of that, I don't need much, and that tool is perfect for my needs. And it's just one of those things where I wish I could just freeze it. I don't want it to become more complicated. Software over time tends to become more complicated. I'm like, it's perfect. Don't mess with it. That's all I want in an audio editing tool.
Are you a Mac or not?
Yeah. Mac.
Apple phone or one of the other brands?
No, I have an Android. Actually, that's a good point. I know. I'm very confusing there. I've been using a Mac forever, and I'm a big fan of Apple's notebook products. But I do have an Android phone, and I just find that when it comes to phones, originally I had an Android phone because I used what's called Project Fi, which is Google's kind of cell phone service. And I love the travel. And so they have a special deal where basically everything costs the same to you no matter where you are on the planet, data-wise, which is a pretty amazing thing. And so it's just knowing that you get off the plane, your phone will work wherever you are. You don't have to swap SIMs or get a new phone or anything like that. So I wanted that, and when I originally got that, you could only do it with Android phones. They've since allowed iPhones, but at the time it was only Android phones. I've got my same phone. It works. I don't mess with the phone. I'm not doing a lot with it all the time. I don't play games on my phone or anything. It's again, very utilitarian.
Do you read on your phone or your laptop, or you just read hard,
Yeah, good question.
Like actual books.
Yeah, so for the podcast, I actually really prefer physical books because I'll mark them up. I will underline and take notes and scribble and whatever. And I think it's just helpful to have a physical book for that purpose. It helps me think about things. For fun reading, I will use a Kindle, and I am ebooks for everything for that because of its portability. And on my phone, sometimes I would use the Kindle app, or I use an app called Pocket. I don't know if you guys know Pocket, which is a pretty great one for if you ever read an article online and you're on the web and you're on your computer and you're like, okay, I have to go do something else, but I haven't finished the article. I guess I'll just leave the tab open. And then you have 30 tabs open or whatever. If you click, you can set Pocket up. So you just click a little thing in your web browser. It magically sends it to your phone and formats it beautifully for your phone. And then when you're out and about, you can just quickly finish reading it on your phone. No big deal. Or you can just read the whole.
I will have known what Pocket is and be using it.
Yeah. Pocket's great. I mean, it's interesting because I've been using it for a long time, and they've just recently started to monetize it. So they're starting to put ads here and there, whatever. But it's a super useful tool. So Pocket is great for when you're kind of on the go and you just have like a minute. Like you're not going to get yourself into a heavy book or something. But if you just I just try and, as I go through my day, if there's an article or two that look interesting, I just hit the button. And then next time I have 5 minutes to spare because I'm waiting for a subway or, waiting for going on a walk and I'm waiting for a light to change or whatever, I can just pull that up and, read something for a few minutes. No big deal.
This is great.
That's awesome.
By the way, before you ask your question, Ellen, two things. One, I did put my phone on airplane mode, so I don't know why I keep getting beeps. And the second thing is they decided to start cutting down a tree right next door to my house as soon as it started. I don't know if you hear that, but those two things have been happening, both out of my control. I'm just one man with no technology.
That's okay. Anyway. We forgive you.
Thought I'd throw that out there.
That's, what, it's on your computer, the ding. Stuff happens. Stuff I fully expect.
Stuff will probably continue to happen. So.
Yeah, I fully expect the little girl next door to get into her swimming pool very soon, and she screams the whole time she's there. So
great.
Wow.
So we got a guy. We got a guy.
Yeah, seriously.
In GarageBand, you can get rid of all the background noise.
Do it all. Okay, so I thought Lee, we were going to ask him something else about which he would want to get rid of.
I felt like the answer. I've learned so much already from this podcast. I can't wait to go out and switch over from Evernote and get a Pocket. And I mean, I felt like I don't want to tire him out. I don't wear him out. Burn him out, Ellen.
Okay, so your side gig is your show. I mean, is it a side gig or is it more like just a labor of love that you do because you read books and you want to talk to people? Is it a side gig or is it just like hobby, labor of love?
Yeah, I don't know. It's sort of an interesting amalgamation of them all. I will say probably it leans more towards hobby, labor of love. And in that I'm not, I do want to grow my audience. That's important, but I'm not trying to monetize. A lot of times when I get into conversations with people about a podcast, it's instantly like, oh, how are you going to monetize? Are you selling ad space? Are you product placement? Are you this or that? I've got a little ad at the beginning to get people signed up on Audible and make a little money sometimes if people do that, which kind of covers hosting fees, whatever. But generally, I want to grow my audience, but I also really just do it for the love of literature. I think for me, it's really important that I expose myself to books that are different, that I wouldn't have just plucked off the virtual bookshelf, as it were, or the bookstore shelf. And I think the same is true for the people that listen to the podcast. I speak to such a wide variety of people from such a wide variety of backgrounds. I think it's really important, for me to get out of that filter bubble that we can find ourselves in. And even as a reader, I can find myself in that filter bubble. I love science fiction, for example. And if I had nothing to do in life, I would just sit and read science fiction all day, every day, probably. And which is great. But I think, again, it's important to expose yourself to different things. And I think that helps your mind expand and broaden and allows it to be more creative and imaginative because you're pulling in so many different sources and thinking through so many different new ideas from different perspectives. And so hosting a podcast where I interview authors is one way of sort of keeping myself it's like a mechanism by which I keep myself accountable to do that. And it forces me to read new things. And, some of the authors I speak with get pushed to me. There are various publicists will reach out and say, check out this new book. Sometimes it's friends will know about the podcast and say, you've got my friend just published, check this out. I also ask all my authors to recommend other authors. So sometimes there's been times when I'll get into a series of philosophers and I'll talk to 4 or 5 philosophers over a 6-month period because they keep referring me around. Or I talked to a bunch of Canadian authors specifically because I got to one and then she kept referring me around.
Right.
So, I think that is just such an important way of exposing ourselves to new ideas that I think that's my, that's what I'm so excited about. And that's what I love to share with my listeners.
Awesome. So Lee, you're up.
Well, I had a question prepared. Like, would you expect anything less from me?
Not at all.
I felt like, you know what? I'm going to give him an ambush question at the end.
Nice try.
It's not really an ambush question, but
you already told me.
No comment was his answer. No, I thought we talked about in the very beginning about your real job, your day job, your main job.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It occurred to me that in being able to find $5 million worth of inefficient spending, you must have some thoughts on the difference between efficiency and inefficiency. And I know you can't speak to specifics, but how that actually could apply to us in our lives. Things you see in wasteful spending of time, energy, and resources in your regular job. Maybe there's some clues that we could learn from. Plus, I thought it'd be fun to give you a question you didn't know was coming. To watch that.
Watch my brain work. First off, that's a great question. And yeah, my day job really is about, I do both audits and non-audits, but the audit portion is really thinking about, when a government agency is running a program, what are the inefficiencies there? What is the waste? We look for duplication, overlap, fragmentation, and so you can see I'm stalling well, but I
like
think
the part where you said, "Great question, Lee."
Great question. That's always as an interviewer, I know when anyone says "great question," they're stalling. So I know all the tricks, you see, because I sit on the other side as well. So yeah, I think that there is a lot to be learned here. When we look at agencies a lot of the time, we find out that a lot of times they start things out without a plan. They just start doing things. And sometimes they have to, right? Like there's a pandemic and the world is falling apart and we were just told to send out checks to everybody in America tomorrow. They're going to just start doing stuff. But at the same time, we did do this before, right? In 2008, there was a huge crisis and we also sent checks to every person in America then. So it's not unprecedented. So, we could say that, well, you've done this before, might be useful to go ahead and, put things in a playbook and write down what you did so that next time you have some on the shelf you can pull off and say, hey, let's not totally mess this up again or whatever. So let's try and reuse some of that. So, I think as you go through life, think about what kinds of plans you can create for things that you want to do. And then, and this is, Ellen's book, of course, is huge on all this, is her action plans. It's thinking about your plans for what you plan on doing and then having them in place. If you figured out a successful plan, use it. If you don't, go back and figure out what was wrong, make changes, try again. I think that just doing that it's difficult for people, because just doing things is so much more fun and easy than planning and organizing to do them. And I think so. We sort of have to force ourselves a little bit to take a quick step back and realize that. And and maybe another thing to think through is communication. And a lot of what we run into is that agencies aren't communicating so well within their agency. So there's different teams that are siloed, or they're not communicating well among, between other agencies and themselves. So whether it's like a turf war and people just have decided not to talk to each other or whatever else, stuff like that happens. And when it comes to efficiency, for your personal life, your personal activities, your goals, your personal job, I think really being open and communicative is so important, because you can often be on the same page with someone but not even know it because you're not talking with them openly. Or you can someone else can have a solution to a problem you're having, but if they don't know that you're having that problem, you're never going to get that solution. So I think, trying to spend time, a little bit more time communicating with people and connecting with people is also a lot of what we try and get agencies to do at work, So it's a combo, because we actually try and get them to include communication in their plans, right? So when you're putting a program together and you're going to be running it, think about how you're going to engage and communicate with the public, with other people at your agency, with people outside the agency. Are you setting up weekly meetings to check in on how things are going? What if somebody leaves? What if the main person at your agency quits? What's the line of succession? How are they communicating what's going on to other people so that there's not a hole if someone, all of a sudden disappears? So those are my two answers there is plan well and think about communicating more.
And I think one thing you said is a lot of people, planning is a way to procrastinate. So they'll plan and never do anything. So at some point you just have to act and react and change as you go. So not letting
So I
in and of itself a huge
absolutely
well, this is procrastination.
So I can actually speak directly to this regarding the podcast. So I had this idea for the podcast in early 2016, and it wasn't until late September that my first episode came out. And I would say I probably spent most of 2016 stuck in planning. And I definitely regret that now, because I was just like, well, okay, I want to do a creative project. I want to do podcasts. I love books, but what should it be? Should I have two authors and should they spar about some topic? Should I have a panel? Yeah, exactly. Panel should just be me talking about books or whatever. Should I even interview anyone at all? And so I just thought about it for a while, and then I would think about it and then be like, I don't know what to do, throw my hands up and then just put it away and then do something else for the next month or two and then come back to it and then be like, ugh, I still don't know what to do. And then it starts to weigh on you, it starts to become kind of a drag and you get frustrated by it. Then the whole idea starts to bother you and you don't want to deal with it. Right. And then it's like, I was just sort of like, you know what, I'm just going to do an interview. And I literally maybe I lucked into this, but one of my roommates at the time had published a short book. And so I was just like, Nate, just come in my room and I'm just going to talk to you about the book. And that was literally the very first interview, was just us chatting about the book. I don't want to listen to it ever again, because I'm sure it's not at all at the level that things are now. Although interestingly, I feel like it's gotten a lot of downloads. I feel like people go back to your number one and for whatever reason and listen. But anyway, so I finally did an interview, and that was just like, the dam burst. I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, this is it. This is perfect. It was so easy. I just talked with one person. I didn't have to worry about a million other things. I didn't getting two people at the same time with me was a scheduling nightmare. And I just realized that was going to be a disaster. So yeah, just to tell that story, you gotta start. And I think, one of the other things you said you wanted to ask me about was advice for, managing all of this. And I think that's another thing that I was a little worried about, was how am I going to manage both? And so I had to be honest with myself about how much time I had, but then just start and then see and then iterate. When you start doing a side project or another business or something else, it's hard to know how much time it's going to take up until you start doing it. Do a little bit of it, get a sense of, what you need to do right now. And then you can adjust and say, okay, I'm going to spend 3 or 4 hours a week on it. And I'm going to adhere to those boundaries for right now because I have a day job or something like that. And then produce to the extent that you can based on that, And so those are the sorts of lessons learned I wish I had many years ago when I was starting this out.
Well, I'll say this. After this interview, I would say if you had more time, we'd want you as a regular guest every week. I mean, are you kidding me? Talk about delivering the goods. Talk about people who never text me my entire life. They're all texting me at the same time. Jon, you were a fantastic guest. And I know you're thinking, well, you've only had 2 guests. But honestly, no one will ever be able to top that. That was, I fascinating, right, Ellen?
Yeah,
Just fascinating.
yeah. So, how can people get a hold of you or find your podcast or, any sort of thing like that?
Yes, please. Great question. So the podcast, Read, Learn, Live. Lee has been the one and only 2-time guest on the show. Ellen has been a guest on the show. They were fantastic guests, so you can look up their interviews if you want to hear more of them. I'm on every podcasting platform known to woman and man, from iTunes to Google to Spotify to iHeartRadio, TuneIn. I'm on all those. I'm on the web at readlearnlivepodcast.com. You can email me at jon@readlearnlivepodcast.com if you have ideas for books you'd like to see featured. If you're an author and you want to get on the show, I'd love to hear from you. And yeah, I'm so happy to be doing that. And I think it's so fun and amazing that I got to come onto your show as well. So I'm glad we did this cross podcasting, spectrum. I don't know what the right word is, but there's some sort of sci-fi word here where we can talk about the universes colliding.
That's so awesome. We're so glad to have you. Thanks for listening to the Faster, Easier, Better show. Remember to subscribe, like, and review, and join us again next week.